I've been obsessed with thinking about the Earth capture of Barbossa and Leal to such a degree, just going over each part of it, trying to figure out what's the heart of it. You know, the heart of it is that loop of wire that goes through a torus ring. It's simply the fact that it's a wire connected to itself. You know, when I was 5, I used to dream of connecting a wire to itself after quickly plugging it into the outlet and then quickly connecting it to itself before it loses its energy, to give it a chance for the energy to go around in circles forever and ever. And I think this is the only thing to look at. It's kind of like Edward Leedskalnin's perpetual motion holder, only better. Because, at least in the AC version, well, let's put it this way. We don't have magnetic circuits for the most part. Sometimes we have somebody who comes up with a magnetic motor strictly built on magnets and nothing else. But most of the time, that's not the case. Most of the time, we just have circuits, and everything's based on wires, copper wire, because it's low resistance. And when you think about it, the Earth capture of Barbossa and Leal is based on this, because all of our appliances are based on electricity going through wires. So they came up with the heart of the thing is a piece of wire looping back on itself, which by itself doesn't have any resistance. It sees no resistance, because it has none of itself. Now, its interaction with all the other components in the entire circuitry, yeah, there's some, but minimally. Well, how much resistance can there be here going half a turn? It's not even a whole turn, half a turn, just going through the center of one toroidal magnetizable core of a transformer. There's not a whole lot of resistance there. So I'm trying to think to myself, okay, when we're dealing with the circuit diagram, which I'm not going to bother to get up and get a copy of to put in front of our face. Maybe I should, but I'm too lazy. This is at the center, and it's called the secondary. The primary surrounds it in a sense. At least that was the way it was drawn. And the primary drives the secondary, but the secondary has no resistance. The primary is being pushed by the source. The secondary is merely being induced. It has no pressure, so it has no resistance. It sees no resistance. It has no pressure pushing it, which means it's not going to have any back EMF fighting the pressure that pushes it from within itself. So it basically has no internal resistance and no external resistance to speak of. So I'm thinking to myself, if this is the core of the whole shebang and the heart of the matter, why would that be? Well, maybe it's because the rest of the circuitry doesn't see it the same way as this does. The rest of the circuitry has resistance of all types. It's being pushed, so it resists, so it creates its own internal resistance. And this doesn't, and so maybe the other wants to conform to this and ignore. But how can it? Well, because we give it an out. We connect this circuit, we connect the broken circuit, which is neither the primary nor the secondary, but a third circuit that's broken. We connect it to the earth, and the only way it can make up the difference, being that it's broken, is to take extra energy from the earth to make up the difference. Why? To make itself look like this. If we add a load, what normally happens? The values go down. You know, we supply it with watts, the watts go down because they're getting used up. Well, this isn't getting used up. It never gets used up. So the other parts of the circuit that are made to conform to this, they have to make up the difference because they're being demanded. Load is being demanded on them, and so they make up the difference by taking in the extra from the earth so that they can try to approach mimicking this. This becomes its standard. Becomes the standard for all the other sub-circuits in the entire circuit. This is the ideal. Nothing pushes it from within itself. Nothing pushes back from within itself. It has literally nothing pushing. It's just there. So it starts to spin, and it doesn't take long before it picks up speed. And if a load comes along to drain the rest of the other sub-circuits, this one doesn't see a load. So why should the other sub-circuit see a problem with having a load being demanded upon it? So the other sub-circuit makes up the difference from the earth. Or from wherever, maybe the air, you know? In fact, when I looked at videos on YouTube, and one in particular, a couple actually, it was the same line of reasoning. They were running their circuits off the main, and they had either no grounding rod at all, or just one, because they were running off the main, for the most part. And that tells me that, well, let's see, there's no neon bulb. How come it's missing, and why is the neon bulb so important? Because the main, the power grid, probably uses an equivalent or the exact duplicate, functionally speaking, of the neon bulb antenna, air ground if you prefer, somewhere back at the station, or probably en route. All those little all those supporting structures, you know, holding the grid up off the ground, there's probably something going on there that acts as an antenna release, a neon bulb release for excess pressure. It's like, you know, you got a pressure relief mechanism on your piping so that if the water pressure gets too high, it leaks out some of the water rather than burst and, you know, sever the entire pipe and create a permanent damage if you don't go and fix it. So it instead temporarily damages itself to let out the pressure. And I guess that's what's needed when you're dealing with a system that could build up too much pressure. It's just like we're told in Clint Ober's and Marty Zucker's book, Earthing, that the autoimmune response kicks in because we fail to ground ourselves. After all those millions of years, the body learned how to turn on the immune system to kill germs, but it never learned how to turn it off because it didn't need to, because all it had to do was be grounded to the earth all the time. So if the power grid fails to be grounded to the air to release excess pressure, which can happen even though it's grounded to the earth can give it some excess pressure, or the system itself can give itself some excess pressure. So the only other place to release it is into the air in that instance. So that's what the grid does. It tries to stay stable with the earth at all times, but should a surge occur, it's released to the air. So all these Captor versions that are not dependent on the mains, but are independent of the mains, they don't need a surge protection necessarily. But if they're not dependent on the mains, you know, the other case was independent. Yeah, too many negatives. But if it's independent, then it needs a surge protector. So, where was I with all of this? I think this is the heart of it. You know, there are a lot of elements to the system, but based on circumstance. You know, having a surge protector is really a question of circumstance. If you've got the system hooked up to the mains, you don't need it because it's already there. It's in the grid itself. Now, do they use this in the power grid? Do they use this? I wonder. We've never been told. If they are, they're keeping it a secret. And if they're not, it's probably for the simple reason, what's the simple reason? Oh, bureaucratic reason. That's a simple reason. Keep things not efficient so we can have a good excuse to charge people money. Oh yeah, sure. Why not? Anyway, it seems like a ridiculous concept, doesn't it? I mean, in the independent version of the earth captor, there are two connection points. One is voltage equalization, but the other is amperage pumping. And they're both connected to this. The amperage pumping is loosely coupled, and the voltage equalization is strongly coupled. But they're all trying to get their cues from this. This is like the orchestra leader. And yet, it's not exactly a traditional conductor of a symphony orchestra. It's more like a jazz conductor who takes his cues from his players, from his musicians. In other words, it's more like an ensemble in which they work together. They play off of each other, they play with each other, and they don't have anybody dictating terms. So this takes its direction from the rest of the circuit, getting it going. But once it gets going, there are no rules, internal rules, to tell it to stop. So a load occurs to the other subcircuits, telling the rest of the subcircuits to stop or slow down. Yet this doesn't see it that way, and it's still hooked up. It's still getting its cues from the rest of the circuit. So you would think the rest of the other subcircuits would slow this down. You would think. And they would, if the entirety of the overall picture is not in some way or manner hooked up to something to make up the difference, that being the earth. That's where the difference lies. Because you can always dump excess energy into the air or back into the earth where you got it from when you don't need it anymore. When the load isn't there to require it. But when a load comes on the scene and there's not enough energy to make up the difference, this guy's having no problem. He's just doing fine. So what's the other guy's problem? So, in a sense, the load is a bit of a... How to put this? This is like the producer of a movie set. And the broken line hooked up to the earth and to the air, that's the director, the requisition officer. Well, yeah, that sounds confusing. The producer, let's put it this way. No, the studio head. There you go. This guy's the studio head. You see the studio head sweating balls, or he's going to be cool, right? Because he's a studio head. He's got, and so he doesn't have to worry about anything. And there's no reason why the other parts of the overall circuit have to act like they have anything to worry about, even though demands are being made upon them, but not being made upon the studio head. Because the studio head is there for a reason, to nurture and support the activity of all the other parts of the circuit. And that's what it does. It's playing a maternal kind of role, or paternal if you prefer, nurturing. It's a nurturing role, so it doesn't feed anybody. And it doesn't need to be fed because it's a closed loop. It sits in its own world. It could be dead with nothing flowing in it for all it cares. It doesn't mind. It doesn't matter. It's detached. It's like it has no personal goal of its own to see anything happen. Yet, it's connected to the other subcircuits. So it's a stabilizing influence because it can speed up and slow down, but it won't allow for an imbalance to linger. And any kind of imbalance, such as a surge or the inverse of a surge, a lack. So that's what its purpose is. Its purpose is to maintain balance, which is kind of screwy because you would think, oh, wait a minute, balance. This is a closed circuit. So where's the free energy come from? Because the other sub-circuits are asymmetrical and they're broken. Some of them. One of them. Just the one. All it takes is one to be broken and asymmetrical. But it takes one to be self-sufficient, to make sure that everybody else doesn't see problems for very long. They go away very quickly. They go away. They don't linger. And then the middle circuit, the primary circuit, is the one that is the interface between this guy who sees no problems and the broken circuit, which is nothing but problems. So it's an in-between. The primary coil is a part of a circuit that's in between, stands in between the broken circuit that the actual circuit that supplies the load, and this granddaddy who doesn't have to take care of anybody. It's like a retired grandpa and grandma. They just sit back and sip a cool tea in the shade of their veranda of their home and just enjoy life in the golden years of their life. This doesn't have to do anything. Just be. Just be there. And yet it can make all the difference. One of the videos that I'm referring to that I saw on YouTube that was based on the mains didn't have any grounding rod, no glowing neon bulb, and a completely different transformer core geometry or shape. And the closed loop was not connected to anything, strongly coupled to anything. It simply went through the interior of the transformer and came back out. Might have been 2 turns, I can't remember. It was at least 1, obviously. Not too many, 2 or 3 at the most. And nothing was shorted to it. Nothing was wrapped around it. No captor loop, no grounding wire wrapped around it. It just sat there. And it's kind of funny looking, because a normal physicist or somebody like me who's just conditioned to think in normal terms, it's like, what good will that do? But I found another video in which a guy had taken a different approach and come to the same conclusion. He wasn't trying to create a replication of Barbosa and Leal's Earth Captor. He simply came up with a transformer design that had a loop of wire, very stout, very low number gauge wire, going through the interior of a transformer and coming back out again. And the transformer was quite a stack. It had a lot of coils on it. It would look like a skyscraper. But he came to the same conclusion, that a loop of wire in a transformer takes away losses, and it starts behaving in a not so conventional manner, namely in the direction of over-unity. So the real heart of the Earth Captor is not the grounding rods, and it's not the neon bulb. It's just a simple fact of how to design a transformer that doesn't lose power. And putting in a loop of wire that doesn't do anything. It's a coil of wire in which one of the strands of the coil goes through the interior of a toroidal section of a transformer. Talk about utter simplicity. And then to base your whole circuitry on that with all of its variations. There's so many variations. And they all work according to the circumstances that they're designed to meet. But they all have this in common. It's unbelievable in its utter simplicity. And it makes the mind reel. Why? Why would it? Well, because this sees no resistance. Because it creates no resistance. The reason why I made this video is because I'm considering taking out the sleep circuit from the rest of my circuitry that I have connected to my earthing bed sheet. Because it's trying to do the same thing, only not as efficiently as this. It's trying to use a battery, a AA battery, with 6.6 gigaohms of resistance to reduce the amperage to around 200 picoamps, and further reduce the 200 picoamps by shorting the two terminals that come out of it before it comes to the bed circuitry, or the bed itself. And so I'm trying to eliminate all the amperage and be left with only the voltage, and that makes me wonder, well, gee, what am I trying to do here? I'm trying to do things the hard way. This is doing it the easy way. So why don't I just take a coil of wire and throw out the circuit, throw out the sleep circuit with the AA battery and the 6600 mega ohm resistors, 66 count. I mean, that's like the hard way to do things. Why not just do this? Sounds a lot simpler. Because I already have not one but two toroidal cores in the form of a floor flange, with the grounding wire wrapped around them before continuing on to either the grounding rod in one direction or my earthing bedsheet in the other. So why not add another piece of wire, but this one multi-stranded and in the direction of being heavy gauge, a low gauge number, a low Ogg number, and just pass it through the center and loop it a few times. One of those videos yesterday, the guy there was a little gap. He made a gap in his coil of this continuous loop. And he had a plastic container, a very small one, with some kind of magnetizable piece of iron in it. It had a lid on it. And he just put it in there, and it was like the indicator lamp. It showed in a very ingenious manner, without needing a neon bulb to let you know that the device is on. You know it's on because the thing rattles around inside. It's jumping like a jumping bean. It's just jumping around in there, a Mexican jumping bean. Making all those rickety, rackety sounds to tell you that there's a magnetic field in here, which tells you there's amperage. It's spinning around in there. Unbelievable. Uncanny. Uncanny. That was the best way for me to illustrate how powerful this is in its utter simplicity. This is what the Captor loop boils down to. And it's not the loop of wire, the grounding wire that loops around this. It's this, the keeper, the EM keeper. It keeps the EM going and going and going.